It is time. Good afternoon and welcome to another Applied Physiology Friday. I am your host, Doc Hickey. Today we will be talking about overreaching versus overtraining. First thing we're going to take a look at is the fitness fatigue theory. And if you're studying for any of the National Strength and Conditioning certifications, you will find this right at the beginning of every text. So the fitness fatigue theory teaches us 4 key points. The first thing, training produces both fitness and fatigue. An increase in fitness comes from an increase in training loads. When training loads are highest, the greatest increase in fitness occurs, along with the greatest increase in fatigue. And then the fourth key point is that fatigue dissipates faster than fitness, leading to an increase in performance capacity. So let's take a look at these a little bit slower, break them down a little bit more. The first thing we look at is training produces both fitness and fatigue. When my athletes do a workout, the first thing that's going to happen after the workout is done is they're going to get tired. They're going to slip into a reduced capacity according to Celias Model. We're going to be getting into Celias in a minute, but if you recall from last week, we talked about Celias Model of stress adaptation. So the first thing a workout does is make the athlete tired. Then at the level of the cell and also at the subcellular level, the body will begin to rebuild. So if it is a cardiovascular stimulus, the body is going to address mitochondrial density, capillary density. If it is a strength or power stimulus, the body is going to address the actin and myosin myofilaments that were torn down during the workout, during that power, during that strength workout. So the key is to allow for adaptation, because increased fitness comes from increased training loads. This is the interplay of the training principles of specificity, adaptation, and overload. The next thing that we take a look at, when training loads are highest, the greatest increase in fitness occurs, along with the greatest increase in fatigue. This is especially applicable to the GPP phase of training, the general physical preparatory phase of training. In the day of Corona, the COVID-19 lockdown that we're still in, this is a prime opportunity to really increase training loads and also to increase fatigue for our athletes, because there are no competitions on the horizon. So this provides a great opportunity to really increase fitness and to really increase fatigue, really increase the body's ability to recover in the face of fatigue, and get our athletes ready for multiple days of competition, multiple consecutive days. I'm thinking of Coach Murphy right now with his Jacksonville Icemen and the East Coast Hockey League. They do what's called a 3-and-3. 3 games in 3 days. They'll play Friday night, sometime on Saturday, either Saturday afternoon or Saturday evening, and then they'll come back around and they'll play Sunday evening. So when we're looking at what's going on, there's going to be a lot of fatigue by the time that 3rd day rolls around. So when we look at the fitness fatigue theory, how do we apply it to our training right now in COVID-19? Is that we can actually do 3-and-3 simulators. We can do 3 hard days in a row, bam, 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 let the fatigue really spike, and then a couple of recovery days based on the individual response of HRV, of training density, residual fatigue. We talked about that last week. Allow the athletes to recover and then do it again. The fourth point on this slide is that fatigue dissipates faster than fitness, leading to an increase in performance capacity. What we do is we get the athletes really tired. We give them a hard workout, let them recover. They're going to get into that super compensation where fitness really spikes. And then they're either ready for a competition or they're ready for another training bout. So taking a look at what's going on here with Celias Model, we looked at this last week. This is our baseline. We give the athlete a workout. What we do is we actually decrease their functional capacity. Then we let them recover, and fitness is going to improve up to here. We give them another training stimulus. They get tired. The body goes into a fatigue state. We time the next training stimulus up here, and the athlete's fitness is going to improve. And what we looked at last week, another breakdown of this, we looked at the super compensation being right there. That's our maximal point of fitness. What we want to try to do with our athlete monitoring, whether it's looking at the residual fatigue on a polar flow, looking at some sort of a predictive value from HRV, and also using our intuition as coaches to figure out, is my athlete ready for a workout right there? Or do we need to prolong it a little bit? Maybe they're here, and if we rest another day, they're going to be ready to go. Moving on to our next slide, we're going to be looking today at this purple area right here, this purple explosion. We give the athlete a stimulus, whatever it is, aerobic stimulus, some sort of an interval workout. If you're following Coach Murphy on Instagram, he had a great post yesterday about using heavy dumbbells for goblet squats. Maybe you give your athletes that protocol there. What we're going to do is get the athletes tired, and then we're going to allow them to recover. Today, we're looking at what happens right here. What happens if we miss it? What happens if we don't ride the wave perfectly? You can go online, watch some epic surf wipeouts, and what's going on there is when the surfer's getting ready to take off into the wave and they don't time it just right, and the wave crashes over the top of them. That's going to be analogous to what happens in training when we don't time the recovery right, when we don't get this super compensation, when we miss it, when we drive our athletes deeper into fatigue. So we miss the super compensation, and we drive them somewhere into here, into a deep fatigue, or even into an exhaustion. Basically, we have two types of fatigues to look at. We have overreaching and we have overtraining. Overreaching is actually going to be a good thing. Think about if we are working with our East Coast Hockey League team, getting them ready for a 3-3, and we're going to be getting them ready for the 3-3s right now, late June, early July, even into early August. So we're going to do 3 hard workouts in a row. We are going to overreach our athletes. So what overreaching is, it's defined as excessive training that leads to a short-term decrease in performance. If anybody has ever done a very hard competition, you know that the next day you're going to be tired. You couldn't go out and replicate what you did the day before. In the parlance of the racing biz, I call that going to the well. If you go to the well really deeply on Saturday, on Sunday, there's going to be a good chance that you couldn't go back to the well or go back as deep. There's going to be that short-term decrease in performance. When we look at this from a programming standpoint, overreaching is going to be planned, and the purpose of overreaching is to initiate that super compensation. So if we go back one slide And we'll look at this point again here. What I want to do in terms of functional overreaching is get my athlete tired enough, get them to this fatigue here where they're going to be so tired that it's going to be a few days before we're ready to go hard again. And in those ensuing days, in the B day and in the C day, that's where my subcellular recovery is happening. If we're looking at energy system development, mitochondrial density is going up, capillary density is going up. My athlete is becoming a lot more efficient, a lot more strong, and they're going to be able to sustain longer time at higher heart rates. So the residual stress here is going to be coupled with sympathetic yellow in my HRV. We've been talking about sympathetic yellow, HRV. So when we're looking at HRV, we have green, yellow, red. We have sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic means fight or flight. Parasympathetic means rest. In overreaching, my athletes are in an elevated fight or flight phase. And when they're doing 2 or 3 hard days in a row, that's going to be acceptable. The problem is going to arise when we start to see a pattern of sympathetic yellow, when we start to see 2, 3, 4 days of sympathetic yellow. Now my athlete is deep into overreaching, and that's a sign to a coach that it's time to dial it back. The next thing that we take a look at is when the athlete goes from green on one day to and when they're green, they do a hard workout. Whatever the modality is, it's going to be very hard. They're going to go into the strained range or the very strained range of the polar flow. And then that's going to be accompanied the next day with sympathetic yellow. Or if the workout is so hard, it's going to be sympathetic red. Sympathetic red means we really have to be careful in terms of our short-term programming of this athlete. We really need to dial it back because the next stop is going to be parasympathetic red. And what parasympathetic red means is my athlete is going into the exhaustion stage of Celias Model. I give you a little example of overreaching going into exhaustion from Tales of My Misspent Youth. Today's picture brought to you by Syracuse University, the Carrier Dome. And I spent a lot of time running at the Cuse back in the day, early 90s. So back in 1992, my goal was to qualify for the Olympic trials in the 800-meter run. And I put my training program together, started training for the trials in January of 92 and building up to a peak in June of 92. Didn't make the trials, but I had a lot of fitness. And so I said, I'm just going to race. Every single weekend, I'm going to race. And back in 92, we didn't have athlete monitoring. We had heart rate monitoring. We didn't have polar flow. We didn't have HRV. So I just trained and raced and trained and raced. I raced for 22 weeks in a row. By the 23rd week, I was so deep into exhaustion, I didn't even know my name. And I had to take about a month of very, very low intensity, very low cardio, just working basically 20 minutes a day and mobility in order to dig myself out of that hole of exhaustion. So when we're working with our athletes nowadays, we can use polar flow, we can use HRV to prevent our athletes or prevent us as coaches from digging our athletes into that hole. Or if we're self-coached, we're going to use our tech to prevent us from going into that exhaustion phase. The next one we take a look at is the exhaustion phase. This is overtraining. If you're studying for an NSCA cert, NSCA doctrine calls overtraining prolonged maladaptation. All this means is that we are in trouble. We are deep in a hole. And overtraining results from the continual application of if some is good, more is better. Let's go back to that example of me back in '92, tales of my misspent youth. The Olympic trial period comes and goes. I miss the trials on the last day, and I don't go to the Olympic trials. I have this phenomenal fitness. So let's train. Let's keep training. Let's keep racing. If some is good, more is better. I'm going to take out the fact that I didn't make the Olympic trials on my competition. So I'm just going to keep training, keep racing, keep training, keep racing, and then I'm going to crash. When we take a look at overtraining, when we take a look at preventing that crash, there are warning signs, there are biomarkers of how to prevent this. The first thing is several consecutive parasympathetic yellow days. Parasympathetic means my body is in rest and digest phase. When I wake up and I'm parasympathetic yellow, that is a warning sign. It's the clanging gong that my body needs a rest day that day. So I take a rest and I have a reduced training load, and the next day I'm parasympathetic yellow. I need more rest. The next day I'm parasympathetic yellow. I need more rest. When I start getting consecutive days of parasympathetic yellow, I need to be real cautious because, again, I know that the next stop on the train is going to be parasympathetic red. And parasympathetic red is going to be that's going to be my indication of big, big, big problems. So another warning sign is if I get a sympathetic red on one day, and then the next day I go bam, right into parasympathetic red, then I know I have problems. My body was in a deep, deep, deep fight or flight phase here. We did a workout on Monday. Tuesday, my body is in a deep fight or flight phase, trying to resist, trying to overcome the effects, the residual effects of the workout we did on Monday. And then Tuesday, we're sympathetic red. Wednesday, our body flips the switch, and now we're parasympathetic red. Now my body is giving up. That workout was so hard on Monday that on Wednesday, my body says, no mas, throws up its hands and says, I need a rester. And so as a coach, when we see this pattern, we really need to take the foot off the accelerator. We got to take the foot off the gas. As coaches, sometimes we're the brake, sometimes we're the gas. When we see a pattern like this, workout, we're green on green Monday, sympathetic red Tuesday, parasympathetic red Wednesday, we got to put the foot on the gas as the coach. When we see these warning signs, this means that we are in the exhaustion phase of Celias Model. We've dug a hole for the athlete, and now we got to let them crawl out before we start to give them more work. Because the thing is about overtraining, when you look at it, to get a little philosophical here, there's no such thing as overtraining. It's just that there's not enough resting. So it's not that you've overtrained your athletes, it's that you've under-rested your athletes. You've done a great job of giving them a stimulus that gets them out of their homeostasis. But the thing that you haven't done is allowed them to rest, recover, and adapt to that stimulus. So moving on, taking a look at heart rate. Now, if you were to get my training log from 1992, back at the Cuse, back at the Dome days, you would see that every day I used morning heart rate as an indicator of recovery. Now, the thing is, remember, 1992 was a long way away. I'm not even going to try. We're live here. I'm not going to try to figure out the math skills. It was a long time ago in a faraway galaxy. So if you were to look at my heart rate zones, you would see that in July and in August, when I'm racing every single weekend, sometimes twice a week, my resting heart rate when I woke up in the morning was nice and low. And that it was telling me from the 1992 knowledge that I'm recovered, that I'm ready to go. But now we look at that retrospectively and woo, I had some issues. So when we look at an increased resting heart rate, if I take my normal heart rate when I wake up in the morning and it's mid 40s and the next day it's mid 50s, I've had a jump in resting heart rate. This tells me that there's an increase in sympathetic activity. And how I interpret this as the body is attempting to adapt to a stressor via resistance. So my body is in an elevated sympathetic state, and it is resisting the hard workout that we did the day before. I'm trying to prevent my body from going into exhaustion. That's essentially what the resistance phase is. Now, when I have a decreased resting heart rate, if you take a look at my training log from 92, there were points where I'd wake up in the morning and my resting heart rate was 36. And I would think, oh, 36, I'm ready to go. And I'd go out and run or ride or do both, because that was an indicator to me that my aerobic capacity was increasing. My cardiovascular efficiency was increasing. I'm becoming better at covering long distances fast. Now, the other thing that we look at with a decrease in resting heart rate, with a chronic decrease in resting heart rate, is that the body has increased its sympathetic tone, or the body has increased its sympathetic activity because it's in the exhaustion phase. And if you look at my training log and you see low resting heart rate, but my racing performances, I kept getting slower and slower and slower, that meant that I was deep into this parasympathetic state, and my body was heading from a racing standpoint into exhaustion. And the only way I could dig my way out was gonna be through an extended period of rest. Another thing we can take a look at in terms of heart rate is what's going on with my heart rate during my training sessions. So I'm doing an interval workout. Maybe I'm doing 3-minute runs and I'm letting my heart rate recover to 135, which is top of green. And I go out and I do a run and my heart rate spikes. I get it over 170, which for me is going to be deep red, deep high intensity. And then maybe normally it takes about a minute for the heart rate to drop to high green, to drop to that 135. But now it's taken me 90 seconds. It's taken me 2 minutes for my heart rate to drop. This is going to be an indicator that my body has a lot of sympathetic tone in the autonomic nervous system, which means an elevated fight or flight. And that's going to be an indication that I am overreaching. So if I'm monitoring my athletes and I'm looking at how fast it takes their heart rate to drop, or how long it takes their heart rate to drop from the peak of the interval to the recovery zone, and I look at that time and I see that time is increasing, my body's tired. I got to dial it back. Now, the other thing we look at with heart rate is if if I program an athlete to hit 170 during their intervals, and as hard as they go, they can only hit 150, that's going to be an indicator that my parasympathetic tone is very elevated and my body is going to be in that forced resting phase. My body is going to be heading toward exhaustion very, very quick, or it's in exhaustion now. So looking at heart rate during training is going to be a great way to identify sympathetic and parasympathetic tone. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about my mentor. He's up there, a big coaches meeting in the sky, JK. And we did an interval training protocol where I would ride my bike inside on a wind trainer or on rollers, and I would keep my heart rate at the top of the green for a minute, and then I would sprint and get my heart rate to 95% of my max for the second minute. And then we would let the heart rate recover, and then we would let the heart rate recover to 99, and then we would do it again. In that workout, as we progressed through that protocol, the time that it took for me to recover between intervals, for me to go from heart rate at 170 to heart rate 99, dropped from a minute to eventually 30 seconds between intervals. So that's going to show me that my fitness is increasing. If by chance I'm progressing, I start out, it takes me a minute for the heart rate to drop to 99, and then after 2 or 3 weeks, it's down to say 40, 45 seconds, and then the next week it would jump up to a minute. That means that it's time for a deload week. Another thing that we would take a look at is if JK programmed me to be hitting 170 as my peak heart rate, but as hard as I could go, I could only hit 160. That's going to be an indicator that we're hitting that exhaustion phase, that we need to dial it back. And this was back in 2005. And we had heart rate monitoring, and we had JK's intellect, and we were able to use heart rate, what's going on between intervals, to really dial in the recovery. And then that actually, the end product of that was a national championship. I earned a national championship in the 4x800 meter relay at the Masters Nationals that year. I anchored the 4x8, and earlier that morning I took the silver medal in the 10,000 meter run. Taking a look at coaches, what's the take home from all this? 4 key things in terms of establishing what your metrics are. I talk a lot about the principle of individual response for the athletes. However, for the coaches, you have individual response as well. As coaches, you have your own system. You know what works best for you. 4 keys: quantification of training load, evaluation of daily readiness, athlete perception, and coaching expertise. The first one, quantification of training load. As a coach, how are you going to measure how hard my athletes are working? Is it in terms of external training load? What's the volume? What's the intensity? This is going to be on that Excel spreadsheet. How hard are they working? This is going to be in the plan and the reflection, to have some sort of a measure of how much volume, how much intensity they did. That combines to create training density, and then the recovery or non-recovery of that training density is what produces residual fatigue. The next thing that we look at is going to be internal quantification of load. This is going to be training density, an actual metric that's measured by Polar Flow. Just remember, full disclosure, Polar does not sponsor me, neither does Elite HRV. I pay for my own stuff. Number 2, evaluation of my daily readiness, my daily recovery. We've been talking a lot about HRV today. It is so important to figure out what's going on between the heartbeats. How is my autonomic nervous system working? Is it sympathetic? Is it parasympathetic? The next one we take a look at, and then today's presentation is an homage to my mom. Every day for the last couple of weeks, I've been getting up. If you know me, you know that 8:15 in the morning, very early. I call it dawn patrol. Mom and I have been doing dawn patrols, and I'll bring my mom down to the high school track, and she'll do her workout. And every morning, when we're driving down, I always ask my mom, "Hey, Ma, how do you feel today? What do you think of this workout?" Because in terms of training, it's not a workout and I'm going to be dogmatic about it and I'm going to make my athletes do it. The reason why I'm writing this workout is to get my athletes better. So it's a two-way street. I gotta bring my athletes here. I gotta bring the athletes gotta meet me here, and then we gotta go forward. So my athlete perception, how do they feel? How recovered are they? Are they ready to go today, or are they tired? One of my other athletes, Brian K. I can always tell how he has recovered. I don't need HRV with Brian. I just got to hear how he comes into my office. We're back at FAM, and he'll come into the main office, and then he'll come into my own office. And if I can hear him coming down the stairs, if I can hear him coming in the door, singing, jabbering away, we're ready to go. We're going to turn up the gas and we're going to get after it. If he comes in quiet as a mouse, whew, that's a sign to me that I got to dial it back. When we look at our coaching expertise, use your coaching intuition. There's a great story. Zach Evanesh, undergroundstrengthcoach.com. Check him out. He talks about, as a wrestling coach, when he was at Rutgers, there was a exercise physiologist working with the wrestling team to develop cardiovascular capacity, and there was the head coach. And the exercise phys professor says, "Hey, let's put this athlete on the bike. We're going to attach a heart rate monitor to him. We're going to have him ride at this intensity." And the coach says, "I got a better idea. I'm going to take him out for a run, and I'm going to do the run with him." And the exercise professor says, "How are you going to gauge the intensity?" And the coach says, "Right here, the coach's eye." As a coach, the longer you spend in the biz, the better you're going to be able to be to predict where your athletes are. The HRV scores are just going to be another piece to the puzzle. So we're going to have that perception. We're going to have, how does the athlete feel? And then for the coaches, what's the reality of the way my athletes are moving that day? If they come in and they're a bundle of energy, the body language is telling me, let's go. Let's turn the wick up. Let's get after it. If they come in and they're dragging and they're quiet, they're normally outgoing, but today they're quiet. Ooh, this is going to be a good day to dial it back. We're going to do some low-level cardio. Maybe we're going to do a recovery lift. Our 4 metrics: quantify training load, evaluate daily readiness through HRV, ask questions, ask guiding questions. How do you feel? And then use your coach's eye. That's going to be a great way to identify where on the wave my athletes are. So when we're taking a look at athlete programming, we talk about riding the wave. This is my favorite surfer of all time, Rob Machado, Soul Surfer. As coaches, we're riding that wave. We are stressing our athletes, letting them recover, letting them hit super compensation, letting them ride the trough down. So ride the wave. Credit due, Rob Machado. Machado, a great band out of Oneonta, New York. Their greatest hits just came out. Download those off of iTunes, Spotify. They have a song out there called Ride the Wave. That song was running through my head when I was putting together today's presentation. Thanks for coming today. If you want to get in contact with me, reach out. Questions, comments, things that you want to see talked about in the future. Hit me up, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Shoot me an email, runbikedoc@gmail.com. All back episodes right there on YouTube, Doc Hickey. Just go to YouTube, put in the search engine Doc Hickey. There you go. Until next week, thanks for coming and keep on keeping on.